30-minute conversation followed by a Q&A and then a book signing. We have lots of books to sell all up front at the end, so enjoy.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everybody. So nice to see so many people crowding in here. My name is Blair Glaser. I'm an executive leadership coach, a writer, and a writing coach. And I'm very pleased to be here in conversation with Jennifer Lang, author of Places We Left Behind, a memoir in miniature. I'm going to read a little bit about Jennifer so you know her background. She's born in San Francisco Bay Area and now lives in Tel Aviv, where she runs the Israel Writers Studio. Her prize-winning essays appear in Baltimore Review, Under the Sun, Midway Journal, and elsewhere. She holds an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts and is an assistant editor at Brevity Journal, longtime yoga practitioner and instructor. She has another unconventional book forthcoming in addition to Places We Left Behind that will be landed, a yogi's memoir in pieces and poses that comes out this year in October with the same press, Vine Leaves Press. So let's start with memoir in miniature. Tell us what that means.
I think I start with, so do you see how I sit on the stool and I don't even touch the bar? So I kind of just stopped growing before I even really started. I'm 5 foot, not even 1. I was teased mercilessly as a girl for being short. A lot of words we wouldn't say anymore because they're just not PC. And so it's really appropriate to me to have that on. I went back and forth on what this was. But I am going to now co-opt a word that Blair used, which is I wrote in chapterettes. So I love that word.
I love that word.
That's her word. So I wrote in tiny chapters, and anything from 1 line or a symbol to maybe 2 pages. And the whole book is miniature. It's 14,000 words. So everything about this is just small, like me. So it just worked.
I want you to read a chapterette so that we can get a flavor of what that means. And then we'll talk about it. We'll start with a chapterette called Conjunctions, right? Okay.
So this is chapter 2. Conjunctions. After making love on his mismatched sheets, Philippe and I tally how many times we've each been to Israel. I count my trips. 1971, 1975, 1981, 1983, 1984, 1985, 1988, and now in 1989, kneading both hands. He counts his on one hand. 3. You win, he says, as if we're competing. I scan his room. No posters, no mirror, no nightstand. So boyish and beautiful, especially his bed. Tell me everything, he says, adorning me with butterfly-like kisses. My tendency to share too much too soon makes me hesitate. He already knows that I'm here in Israel despite the first Intifada or Palestinian uprising, between a job in France and graduate school in New York, to immerse in Hebrew as well as to spend time with my only sibling and extended family, and that I miss my open-minded California-born parents in the San Francisco Bay Area. But he has no idea that I made a Jackson Pollock mess of my love life the past 2 years and promised my mother that I wouldn't fall in love and stay. No, wait, I want to know why you're here, I say, running my fingers through his silky chestnut hair. What made you immigrate? Israeli chutzpah, Haifa, the Mediterranean, beach, body surfing, falafel, spicy food. Plus, my brother plans to make Aliyah too. We each have one sibling. Mine immigrated to Jerusalem, my temporary home base, immediately after college a few years earlier. And since Aliyah comes from the verb la'alot, which means to go up, he says, I went up in my Jewish observance. Tu comprends? Do I understand that he changed his lifestyle for a country? Absolutely not. All weekend, I study this man, admiring how his pointy nose dominates an angular face. His olive skin glistens with oily patches, and his feet have white lines underneath his sandal straps. All weekend, he reaches for me, amorous and solicitous of my attention. Ever since we met at a Shabbat retreat for Francophones 144 hours earlier, I haven't stopped thinking about him, convinced my secular mother will tell me it was beshert, Yiddish for destiny, after enrolling me in a pilot French program when I was 6. Philippe fits every box on my imaginary list. French, check. Jewish, check. Smart, check. Single, check. Sexy with a guarded smile, check. A far cry from the men of late. One Catholic Parisian whom Sib refused to acknowledge. One Russian married man whom my parents refused to discuss. One once upon a time college friend who refused to commit. Burrowed in Philippe's biceps, I try to block out the conjunctions. If he wasn't Sabbath observant, and he wasn't enwrapped with his new homeland, but he is.
So that really brings all of the themes of your book together in one chapter. And we can talk about the themes in a bit, but I want you, and it's a long chapterette, by the way, compared to a lot of the other ones. I want you to talk a little bit about the format of your writing and the prose, some of which we can't see when you hear it. In the E version, which I had, it looked like certain parts were grayscale.
What's grayscale mean?
That means that they were muted or highlighted in a different color. They didn't come, all right. And then there's also stripe through that you use. So I want you to talk about that and how you thought of that.
So I don't know about the grayscale. So the publisher couldn't control what the Kindle did. So I tell people the print version is, I think, better than the Kindle because there was just more control. So this is my first chapter. Some people call it a flow chart. Is this the grayscale you're talking about?
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
So I didn't start here. I started with a very traditional book with completely normal prose. And it was during the submission process when I was reading all of these small publishers' submission guidelines that I noticed these words, experimental prose, open to experimental prose. And I just kind of scratched my head thinking, wow, I wonder what that means. And it really started there. And the first chapter that came out of me in this experimental way is called Sides, where I do a pro-con list. It was my old childhood friend. This is like a This Is Your Life experience. Super intense. I could go around the room, half of this room, and tell you who these people are. Like, wow, you're just, yeah. Jane, do you want to come in?
I do.
Thank you. So during an earlier iteration, an earlier version, an earlier not this text, like years ago, someone had read and said to me, I wish I could have seen the pro-con list. Should you move in with your boyfriend or not? And I was like, well, I could recreate that. So when I saw this expression, experimental prose, I was like, well, let me start with the pro-con list. So that's how it began. And then I did things that I've just never done before. So I have like a seesaw. The title of the chapter is Seesaw. And everything is thanks to YouTube tutorials teaching me on Word how to do what I did. And I'd have to go back into every YouTube video to redo it because there's nothing that stayed in the long-term memory bank. But I learned it. I figured it out then. So then there's these strike-through texts, and you have to know how many people have emailed or reached out to me to say, is that on purpose or is that just my copy? And I love that. I love that. So hold on. I'm going to turn the question back to Blair and say, what do you think the strike-through is?
I think it's something that you want us to know, but you wouldn't say out loud. So that's mostly what I thought it was, that she writes these things and then crosses them out and then writes something else or just leaves it and doesn't say anything. So I love that use of strike through. I think it can be overdone, but I didn't feel that in this book. I really thought it was funny and very sometimes striking.
So it is that, but for me, what happened was I realized I wanted you, the readers, to know something, and but I felt ashamed that I was thinking it, and I couldn't stand by it 100%. It just felt shameful. It felt like too much. So I have this tendency to overshare, and it felt like that.
Very cool. For those of you who didn't hear the chapter, it really brought forth the themes in the book, which are your connection with France, the fact that your husband is French, the fact that you both have a connection to Israel. I don't want to say too much about how you end up in Israel. You're American, he's French, you're both Jewish. You're also different religious levels of Jewish. And I want you to talk a little bit about the tension of that first.
I'm happy to say it's not as present. It's been 34 years and we really worked. But it was there from the moment we met. So I come from a Reform Jewish background with some camp and youth group friends from this Reform background. These people who I haven't seen in like gazillions of years, like decades. And it's like I was culturally Jewish, but I wasn't belief-based Jewish. God was only present when my mom dropped something in the kitchen and said, God damn it. That was it. There was no conversation about God. But there were some hard boundaries in our house. So I grew up in Piedmont, California. So every Rosh Hashanah, every New Year, we missed school unless it was a Saturday or Sunday. And we went to synagogue, and I had to go to my teacher and say, I'm going to miss this test because, and my teachers in the 1970s would say, well, because of what? And then 10 days later, is that what it is? 10 days? 10 days later, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And the same thing would recreate. I'd be missing a test. I'd have to go to the teacher and say I had to miss the test. And the teacher would say, what? And it's every year in a really non-Jewish community. And let me just add this. Starting in kindergarten, my mom came into the classroom. Did you go to Beach? Okay. Starting in kindergarten, my mom came into the classroom with a griddle, potato pancake mixture, a menorah, candles, and the book of lights. And she shared our other with everybody. She wanted us to share. But the thing is as I was growing up, I realized nobody else's mom was coming in to share the story of Christmas, right? That was just a given. So I grew up other, but not religious, not belief-based. Okay, so can't wait.
Sorry.
It's about 40 years. So fast forward in time, my one brother immigrates to Israel after college, and he starts to take a deep end into Judaism. It's called Return to Religion. It's a thing. It's called Return to the Answers, and he becomes, over a 3-year period, uber religious. And he brings it home to my family in a really not nice way. So this stuff is not so much in this book. It's actually in the second book. So stay tuned. And it made me not like Judaism. Like the struggle was really, really real. And it caused an incredible rift in the family. I mean, a dynamic that was really unhealthy. And so by the time, and then I lived and worked in France. First I was junior year abroad in Paris. I actually lived with a Le Pen extreme right-wing Catholic family, super interesting. 2 years later, went back, worked in the Jewish community, the World Jewish Congress. And all my friends were Jewish, and it was super interesting to see what French Judaism was, French Jewry was. And what it is tradition-based. And so by the time I met Philippe 2 years later, I understood the world he'd come from, which was not in a box. It wasn't Reform or conservative or Orthodox the way it is in America. It was just Jewish. But just Jewish for him was 2 sets of dishes, one for meat meals, one for dairy meals. Every Passover, change the plates, change the pots, the pans, everything, bring in everything new that is only for unleavened food for the week. Every Friday night, go to synagogue with his father, his brother, and his mom. And as soon as they walked in the door, his mom went to one side of a low curtain, and his brother and his dad and he went to another, because that's French Jewry. It's from thousands of years ago, Jewry. And so we had this thing between us from the very beginning. But 6 months before I met him, he decided that in living in Israel, he would increase his observance. So he stopped spending money, turning on and off electricity, riding in a car, cooking, watching TV, all of that from Friday sundown until Saturday sundown. And so I kind of came in kicking and screaming like a little girl, age 23, because I'd seen my brother and I didn't want to live like that. But he asked if I could, Philippe asked if I could do it his way. We were living together, and he asked if I could try it his way to make life easier.
Before we get a little bit into his way, I want to talk about your mother's way. And I think the chapter Naive is a really good one for her, if I'm correct. Is that the one about? Yeah? Yeah, love that. Okay. And I think that'll tie back in nicely.
Naive. 8 months after our first kiss, seconds after opening our eyes one Sunday morning, our phone rings. My mother tells me she needs braces and doesn't want them on for pictures, so can we please give her a date for the wedding? Thanks to her boundary-breaking chutzpah, we decide on the following September. Since the only way to marry legally in Israel is with the chief rabbinate, the authoritative body controlling Jewish marriage and divorce, we hire an American-born Orthodox rabbi in khaki pants, polo t-shirt, and penny loafers, who instantly understands our differing levels of observance and asks how religious we want the ceremony. When I suggest we tweak a biblical tradition whereby the bride circles the groom 7 times to show how she figuratively builds the walls of the couple's new world together, and each circle one another half, Philippe agrees. When I propose my female cousin holds one of the chuppah poles, an honor customarily reserved for men, nobody objects. But, the rabbi reminds me, I have to go to the mikvah. I know, but begrudge a bunch of bureaucratic, God-fearing strangers requiring me to dunk in the ritual bath, naked, for some woman to inspect and bless me in order for our union to be recognized by the state of Israel. After our meeting, I relax, confident the hard part is behind us. I'm so, so naive.
One of the things that I like about Naive is that you start to see how you shrink, which is a theme in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And a theme that I know a lot of women struggle in relationship, at work. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm really loud today, and I think it's like to compensate for exactly that, which is I was really, really young and I gave up my voice. I lost my voice by saying yes in this. David, I can't see you.
I'm sorry.
Do you want to come sit over here?
Sorry, I'm enjoying it.
By saying yes, I will try to keep the Sabbath your way at age 23, not married, just living together. I lost my voice that then took me another 20-something years to get back. And we raised kids that way. So in America, which we ended up in America, it becomes Orthodox, and in our case, modern Orthodox. And I ended up educating 3 kids in a school system that I couldn't stand. But I didn't have a leg to stand on because we had this unspoken agreement. I got country for 16 years, and he got religion. But the Jewish religion, when you observe it, it's your lifestyle. And it's not an easy thing to take on if you don't have the belief. So that's what was missing for me, was the belief. Yeah.
When I was talking to Jennifer about this event and what we wanted to communicate, I had read the book and I was surprised that she and her husband were still together. I said, is he still in the picture? But what's also very powerful about the picture, especially during this time, was reading about your move to Israel together and the political violence that you felt, encountered, what that lifestyle was like, how different it was. It's just, when did your book come out?
September 5th, 2023.
September 5th is my birthday, but that was a month before. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, there is a chapter where your son is born and you're glued to the TV watching the peace talks You're watching them shake hands for the first time. I don't know if you want to read that or you just want to talk about what this has been like, because I know it's been unbelievable.
It's easier to read than to talk.
Okay.
I think that's why I write. Cocoon. On September 13th, 1993, we bring home our 4-day-old son from the hospital. With the crib in one room and oodles of baby presents in another, our spacious apartment bursts. I'm gonna get teary, I need a Kleenex. Philippe urges me to rest, but I can't. All I wanna do is gaze down at my infant and up at the television screen. On CNN, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO leader Yasser Arafat extend arms for the first public handshake between the arch enemies, with US President Bill Clinton at their sides. I stretch out on our autumn-colored sofa. My baby, his eyes pinched closed and his lips puckered, sleeps, oblivious to the words of import. While Clinton speaks, I stroke the wisps of downy hair on my baby's head, overcome by the thought that I've made this helpless, perfect being, that it's my job to protect him. When Rabin speaks, I feel tears prick the edges of my eyes, burdened by the thought that I've settled in this sliver of land where the personal and the political are tangled, inseparable. As these world leaders stand on the White House lawn in Washington, D.C., thousands of onlookers applaud. For months, I've been reading, listening, paying attention to the news. Thanks. I have it in my purse. Thank you so much. That's great. Thanks. Watching these groundbreakers, I wrap myself in a cocoon of illusion, believing that when my child grows up, he won't have to serve in the army, believing there won't even be one. So yeah, it's hard to read that. So the question was? Yes.
What it's been like having this book come out a month before the attacks.
Yeah. So I did not come to the States to have political conversation at all. But the problem is I live in a place where the political and the personal are one. And I arrived in the States September 18th for my 40th high school reunion. And I got to celebrate my book for not a long time before I started to feel like I was actually bearing it. Because I understood. I was here on October 7th. I was in San Francisco. And I understood that, I certainly didn't know what would follow, but I understood that there's semantics going on. So ironically, it's not ironic, but so I'm a writer, and so here's the thing. Semantics are at stake. So on October 7th, the word that was used already on that first day was war. And in contrast to the prior years of living in Israel, where we've had a lot of operations. So it doesn't easily become war. It's when something's really escalated that we call it a war. So this was from the get-go. So I understood the meaning of it. And yeah.
Just we're going to be transitioning soon to a Q&A, and I really want to honor that you're not here to discuss politics. You're here to discuss your book. So just making that clear at this point. Absolutely. So one of the things that really struck me in your book is how delicately you bring up this tension between love of country and love of partner, which is something I hadn't really thought of. I've always lived in America. I've always fallen in love with Americans. So this was an interesting tension. And I want to know some thoughts that you can share about that.
So in my high school into college years, I was a really good Jewish girl. I was a super good Jewish daughter. I was an amazing good Jewish granddaughter. And I dated for 4 years a man studying to be a Reform rabbi. And everyone thought we were going to get married. Everyone. I think for a moment I did too, and he definitely did. But then I went and I did my junior year abroad in Paris. And my world opened up. Everything just changed. And in fact, there was a defining moment in that year. It was 1985-86. And in January of 86, the Challenger spaceship exploded. And it was late afternoon in Paris, and the French kids and the family were in the parents' bedroom where the one television set was, and they called me. I was in my bedroom doing homework, and Madame was in the kitchen making dinner, and the kids called me, Jennifer, bien vite. And I come to the door jamb of the parents' bedroom, which there was no way I was stepping in there. And they're making me listen to the news, and I'm hearing the American newscaster in the background say what happened, and I'm watching the replay over and over of the explosion, and I'm hearing the French news anchors dubbing, and I'm having the two languages go in and out. And of course, I spent the first few months mute. I couldn't understand that language. It was so freaking fast. And I realized in that moment that the two languages were both clear, and I understood, and that it was a feeling of like home shook underneath my feet. I realized, oh, maybe I'm not going to live in America. Maybe I'm going to live someplace else, because I understand this whole other language. And that just opened up the whole world. Well, not the whole world, but all the French Empire, which was pretty big. And right? They were massive colonialists. And it just felt like the world had opened. And I felt the ground shake underneath me. So I had this really defining moment. And I knew that when my boyfriend came that summer to travel, he was too, pardon me, this might sound offensive and I don't want it to, he was too American for me. He was too the same as me. We grew up the same way, such a similar upbringing and values. It was too easy. And something happened to me. I definitely was looking for not easy. So I ended up going from too easy and too similar to mother effing hard. And it just happened. No regrets, but it happened.
Well, it is not easy to write a book about one relationship and make it suspenseful and make it interesting. And you managed to do that very well in this memoir miniature. Anything you want to say? It looks like we've hit that time for Q&A. Anything else you want to add? Okay, so questions.
Oh, we might have to keep talking.
Yeah, we might and keep reading, which we can do.
I'm so impressed by how you keep working with your husband, by the way. It's really amazing. It's the power of love, obviously.
No, really good therapy.
Yeah. What are his thoughts about the book?
Yeah, I get this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, he definitely does not like being in the spotlight here. So this whole thing came out of a MFA program I was in with this beautiful woman over here, Kristen. And I was flying from Israel to Vermont, and it was 10-day intense chunks, and we had mentors we were working with, and then you go home and you have 5 months where you're delivering 25 pages, 20 pages of creative work. And it was my second mentor, second semester, and I had written an essay about running for shelter in the sealed room at age 25, first Gulf War, and my marriage was like a big part of the story. And this mentor, Pat Madden, was basically saying to me in the margins of my essay, I think you should separate your marriage from the sealed room. Your marriage is interesting. And I spent the next 5 months in the margins saying, what's so interesting about my marriage? Because to me, it only felt hard. I mean, there were some beautiful parts, obviously, or I wouldn't be with him, but there was a lot of hard. And he pointed out the multilingual and multicultural and the interdenominational, I guess we could call it, for lack of a better word. And he started to make me kind of take a step back from something that was just, I was too in it. So I went to my husband to say, hey, I would like to try and write our story. Are you okay with that? I knew that was the starting point. And he gave me permission. But there's a huge difference between that permission and this book. I mean, forget the 7 years. There's just a huge gap. So as we were getting closer, this was a year and a half ago, and I needed to deliver the manuscript to the developmental editor at Vianese Press. I had asked my husband in September, before that December date of delivering the manuscript, would he please read it? And he was petrified, and he's like, I sent him the PDF, and then he just didn't open it. And months passed, and he kept making excuses and telling me how uncomfortable he felt. And I was like, but this is happening. And you can see who, yeah, anyhow. And so we got all the way to December. It was a Friday. And I say to him, you have to read this. I have to send it in on Monday. And he says, did you send it? And I was like, I did, but I'll resend it. Now, our office, I'm in open space in our living room, and he's like around the corner behind a closed door. A few hours go by, and I get an email, and it says in the subject line, 2 things, 2 choses. And then I go to my email, and it says, 1, my father taught me how to put on tefillin, not my grandfather. And 2, this sentence sounds awkward. Whatever sentence that was. That was it. And I didn't go into his office. I was just like, really? Like, really? And I let it, I just let some time go. And then we were getting closer to Shabbat, to the Sabbath, where he becomes kind of super stressful. He has to get everything ready because I don't really help so much all the time because I'm not into it still, but I am trying to be supportive and respectful, but I still don't really take part in the way he does it. And it's Friday afternoon, and I basically say to him, is that all you have to say to me? Like, what the heck? And he says, no, I had some responses. So it goes like this. The first is he was really worried that I was portraying him as a villain, he and my brother. And I said, no, I tried to tell you. This is a love story. And then he said, I don't have all the memories you have. And of all the memories that you do have, I don't remember them the same way. And some of the memories I have are exactly the same. And that's memory. And memory is really slippery. And then he said, as I was reading, all I could think was, I can't believe we made it to the other side together. And that was huge. Huge. It's like, for me, what this was I let him into my head, but like 20 years later, 15 years later, I had kept so much inside. And also I was processing it. It takes a long time to process this. You can't write it when you're in it. So he's okay. Now he's really proud. Yeah. Oh, okay.
What does he do?
He's, if you go to my website, israelwriterstudio.com, and you go to events, you'll see this really cool map of the world. So that's his company called Map Me. So my events are in a chart down below the map, but then it links every event that has an address with it that you're not seeing, and it's put on the map. Maps. Technology.
Check map.
He's a programmer.
No, he's the CEO. He's the guy doing the contracts.
Not a writer.
No, but super smart. Yeah.
What languages do you speak in home?
For English, officially. For us, it's a language. So it's usually I speak English, he speaks French, but he often gets into speaking in English with me, and I actually have to say to him, now, will you please speak French? There's a lot going on with age. So we're in our late 50s. So his pronunciation's getting wackier and wackier. So the latest is
You mean in English?
in English. So the latest is comfortable. So I really like when he speaks French because then I really get it more. I don't have to think about what he's saying. And the kids are a version of trilingual.
Because they speak Hebrew as well.
We all speak Hebrew, but it's a version. It's because language is comprehension, speaking, reading, writing. So we all have 100% the comprehension and the speaking of English, except for some pronunciation issues. My kids were mostly raised in America.
Oh, okay.
2 of the 3 of them were educated middle school, high school in Israel. So they really have great, and one of them's in college there, they have great Hebrew. 2 of the 3 of them did the army. 1 did a national service program. So they all have amazing Hebrew. I'm like what's the expression when you're the first generation? When your kid is the first generation of an immigrant parent, what do we call that? I go to my kids for help with the Hebrew. I go to my kids for help, like with a lot of Hebrew stuff.
Hi, I have a similar story. I'm the French one, and my husband is American. We both Jewish, but I'm very reformed and he was observant, but I didn't take it too seriously until we got married. I realized that I had to have all these dishes you refer to. But when you're young, you're excited, you're in love, and then 2 decades later, it's becoming like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening again.
Yeah.
So wonderful for
We
you.
could be friends.
I want to ask you about your children. Which way did your children turn out to be? Religious, observant? My children very much know that they grew up Jewish, but there's such a difference in our beliefs. I'm all about, I need my kids to be very happy and choose their mates. And my husband is very angry with me each time because of the whole Jewish thing, I'm sure you understand what I'm going through.
Today we are a gender divide. My husband and son keep the Sabbath, and my son's wife, and my girls and I are pretty irreverently secular.
And that's okay with your husband?
Oh yeah. Therapy. A lot of therapy. Amazing therapy.
But as a Jewish husband, it's good for you that you managed to go to therapy. That makes us.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's in here. Maybe I'm wrong. Hold on.
Meanwhile, while you're looking for it, I was really interested in the fact that, back to the language issue, Hebrew has, you said, 33,000 words, and English has close to 180,000. Very interesting difference in expression.
Tears and fears. So this is 1992 Haifa, Israel. All summer long I cry. When little blisters form between my fingers and itch me awake at 2 a.m., when strangers cut in front of me in line at the grocery store, when Philippe tries to solve my tears like a calculus problem, when strangers cut in front of me in line at the post office, when Philippe doesn't try to solve my tears, when strangers cut in front of me in line at the bank, when Philippe suggests therapy, when strangers cut me off on the road, when friends suggest therapy. Within 15 minutes of my first session with an American psychologist, as in someone from my country and culture who speaks my language and understands my mentality, in the next neighborhood, she diagnoses me with culture shock, followed by, I think your husband should join you. A week later, Philippe and I sit in her humdrum home office, a standard Israeli room with speckled tiled floors and not quite white walls, a few framed diplomas from East Coast universities on the wall above her desk. I'm scared to start a family, I confess. Over the past few months, he's mentioned the 4-letter word beginning with the second letter of the alphabet. My daughter-in-law didn't get that. Each time I've conjured excuses like my thesis and my questionable career path. More confessions about Shabbat and kashrut, about his beliefs and my doubts. How can we raise kids if we're so different, if he doesn't accept me as I am? Actually, he says, she doesn't accept me as I am. Full body clench, jaw, fists, shoulders. The psychologist pauses. So how do you want to raise your future children? I face my husband of 2 years. If we have a boy, will he have to wear a kippah? What about girls wearing pants? I don't want my offspring to look different from me, to wear outward symbols of Judaism on the street, whether here or abroad. But when did I lose my voice and become so passive in our relationship? Over the course of the next few weeks, as the country hunkers down for the holiest of days, we discuss a handful of kid-related hypotheticals, from biking and drawing on the Sabbath, to swimming and doing homework on holidays, to school systems, religious versus secular versus pluralistic, until it feels like we're tempting fate, until each one of my apprehensions is exposed, until every one of my crying jags stops. So it started early with therapy.
Did your kids read the book?
So the 30-year-old, I made a grave error a year ago with my older two, who were then 29 and 25. We were in San Francisco overlapping. It was amazing. I took them to breakfast. It was amazing. I tell them how exciting this whole thing is. It was amazing. And I say, let me just read you a little bit. And I chose the most stupidest thing to read. I've already read it to you. All I need to read is the first line. After making love on his mismatched sheets. And my son stands up and he goes, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to know. So I made like a really big judgment error. His wife has read it and she thanked me because she feels like she said, I get to know you as a person and not just a mother-in-law. And that was beautiful. So then I think she was trying to make him read it, but if he's read it, he hasn't said anything, which goes with, that's, yeah. The 26-year-old who's really open usually hasn't said a word, so I don't really know what that means. And I'm not going to ask. And the 24-year-old who read it in front of my eyes and didn't say a thing.
Wow.
Yeah, different wiring. Yeah.
I just have a little offbeat question for someone who's learned languages and lived overseas in other communities. You know, the one thing that has come up for me in that situation is that, which I never talked about in my experience, that you find that a tremendous amount of what people talk about, you tend to think of vocabulary, but you find that pop culture is enormous. And if you're picking up a language as an adult in another country, that you're out to dinner with all these people that are talking about, you know, the equivalent of Seinfeld or the equivalent of musicians or whatever it is. I'm just curious, has that been an issue for you? Has that come up a lot in your
So
experience?
we live in a bubble, an English bubble, an Anglo bubble. I would say our really good friend group, everyone's mostly American. It's my husband who's actually the one who doesn't have the reference points we have.
I see.
But yeah, no, we are not hanging out with Israelis.
Okay.
Yeah,
Can I ask why?
maybe that. I mean, the whole army thing. So I don't know who knows in this room, but so the army is required for 18-year-old Israelis. Most of the country does it. It's used to be 3 years for boys, 2 for girls. It's now more 2 something for men, I should say men and women years. And I mean, it's already a huge separator, right? We didn't serve. So there's already that. And then I would say to you, I can be one-on-one in conversation with an Israeli in Hebrew and I'm fine, but as soon as I'm 1 to 2, I'm probably not fine. I'm already probably lost in the conversation. So it's hard. It's a hard language. I didn't have that in France. In France, I was definitely with the French.
Jen, so you talked a little bit about how you decided to do these more experimental chapterettes and the visual stuff. How much did the original long form writing that you did make it into the book? And can you tell us a little bit more about your revision process, or did it sort of start as a whole new animal?
So I started from a 90-something thousand word manuscript that I hated. This is 14. So somewhere in the years, in like 7 years ago, I had 90-something thousand words. It was boring. It was long-winded. It was like not page-turning stuff. Hired an editor, got great feedback. And one of the things she said was, you should put it away for a while. And I put it away for months. So it was in the putting it away that things started to happen. I took a class online. I don't remember what came first. Flash, we think of it, for some of us, maybe flash fiction, but I'm writing flash nonfiction. Everything I wrote was about my life in Israel, and the feedback I was getting was, wow, this is fascinating. But the thing is, you're writing in like 200 words, 300 words, like tiny amounts, like a whole story in a tiny amount of space. And in the compressing of my prose started to pop. And I knew I was onto something. So at one point over the years, I had completely revised my manuscript and everything was 300 words max, but it was too similar, each of the chapters. So like it's been a long journey of playing around with how to do this. And then it got divided, the whole story got divided into 2 because Megan Barrett, girlfriend from our MFA, said, I think you're asking the wrong question. This is of the original 90-something thousand manuscript. I don't think this is about your marriage as much as you. What's your journey been? So I put it aside for months and months and months. And I started anew, and that's Landed. That's the book that's coming out in October. And then
How many words is that one?
that's about 45,000.
Okay.
So that's like 3 times the amount of this. Yeah. But then while I was working on Landed, trying to find a publisher, did I say this already? An 80-year-old woman who lives in San Diego who I've never met in person. We've been swapping work for years. I love her writing. And she came to me by email to say, I'm submitting to prose nonfiction chapbook competitions. You might want to do the same thing. You should go back to your short pieces and see what you can link by theme. So I went back into the original manuscript and I took it out, right? So it's like, it's happening, the revision is happening, or the re-seeing it is happening over a long time frame and all that. But then the experimentation really came in the 9th hour. Like in the midst of submitting these, it was under 10,000 words originally. In the midst of submitting it, I started to see experimental prose. And so then I started to go into what was already done and experiment. It is a process.
How many years?
7.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm not ready to bury it.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so first of all, I love that you're 5 feet tall and you're finding your voice.
5'1".
5'1".
You're not 5'1". I'm so sorry.
And you're separating dishes. I'm 6 feet tall and I collect dishes like a crazy woman. So, but this is my question for you. In finding your voice, which is what I really heard, is there any part of you that goes, oh, I shared too much, or how are people going to feel about this? And I asked that selfishly because I had a lot happen to me over COVID that I would love to write about. My kid came out transgender, another kid came out gay. There's a lot of stuff with my husband. I've learned so much about myself. I don't want to necessarily tell their story, but I know that it doesn't feel right because it is so intertwined. So I'm just waiting. And I'm wondering what your process was with that. Because boy, would I love to write something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me start by saying I have one sibling who's threatened to sue me if I ever write about him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Sib. I have my oldest who came to me probably 6 years ago to say, will you please stop using my name in your stories? So I'd already won a prize for an essay all about him going to the army. And I started writing before my second one was born. So they're in it with this guy at babycenter.com. They're in it. My kids are in it. I can't go back and redo all that. But the reason, and I have a sibling, this one same sibling who stopped talking to me. I'm not proud of it because of something that I wrote about our parents. And here's the thing. I'm not giving up my voice again, right? And so my view of that is, if I keep my parents, this thing that happened in my parents' marriage, a secret, the way my brother would like it to be, all I'm doing is giving it a lot of power that it really shouldn't have. It becomes taboo and the elephant in the room, and it creates terrible stuff that just keeps going in the generations, and it's poisonous.
I get that. What if it were, so did you write for Baby Center? Because so did I. I wonder if we wrote
We'll
at the
talk
same
after.
time.
Andy turns his head.
I started at the very beginning at Mom Formation for 3 years.
Okay, we'll talk after.
Okay, I'd love to talk to you
Yeah.
about that. Because that's where my guilt comes from. Because I wrote a lot about my kid's Tourette syndrome as well before she became transgender. And that has been a sticking point that they didn't have, to quote the case, agency, right? So maybe it's a private conversation. Because I don't want to lose my voice either. And I feel like I'm just sitting now on my writing.
So let me say this. So
Yeah.
my husband just read the second manuscript that I had to give in to the developmental editor a few weeks ago. And we had a very frank conversation. He said, has your mom read this? There's more in the second book. I go back in time in a way that I don't hear. In the second book, you learn about my childhood in a way that you don't hear. You learn about my parents' marriage in a way that you don't hear. And I'm going to see my mom this week. And I'm going to have to say something. And it's hard. And I think that I would say to you, you have to figure out what your boundary is and then just stick by it. So I have a boundary with my sibling. I know what it is. I'm not even going to share it because I've made this promise that,
So you asked, or she asked.
I didn't ask. I just know what the boundary is. Yeah. So I don't know how many questions we do, but there's
Yeah,
one question.
I
Oh,
think
she had
we-
a question first.
Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead.
We're running a little bit.
Oh, so related to your personal journey, I'm just curious, at the beginning of this relationship, how like conscious or unconsciously did you like have an expectation that things would change? That like it sounds like if you scaled up, 6 months before you met her, there may have been some latent expectation that like that might not stick. I'm just curious if that was.
I don't know if I thought that might not stick as much as what I was doing was saying, well, I can drive us to the beach. What's the big deal? So, but I think, yeah, and I think that that's what therapy does. Is therapy and age and maturity, you start to understand that you can't expect that person to change. What has to change is your reaction, the way you react to whatever it is, right? But I mean, it took a long time for me to understand that. Did I expect him to change? I don't think so. I don't know. Good question.
I was just wondering, what is this platform you're talking
We'll
about?
talk about it after. BabyCenter.com.
And that is a place you write, or
In the 90s.
in the 90s? Okay.
I really am still back on your question. A couple of days ago, I was with Martha Frankel, who's here. She was doing a class in Laguna, and I think it can be difficult to find out what's your story to tell. Once you find out what's your story to tell, then you need to give yourself permission to tell it. But I think that that's a process. Whose stories are you too blended with? And I think those are good questions for all of us writing in here. Anyway, any more? So buy books, she's signing, she's here. They're selling them there. Thank you for coming out, and
I know. Don't get me started. I know. So I've been up and down. So, my parents were in California. Yeah, so
That's less than I remember.